It was a warm spring night at Icon Park in Orlando, Florida. The kind of night where the lights feel extra bright, the crowds seem endless, and every few seconds you hear a distant scream from a ride. Families were taking photos, teenagers were recording TikToks, and tourists were lining up for one of the tallest drop towers on the planet, the Orlando Freefall. At 430 feet tall, the ride looked unreal, almost too massive to believe. From the ground, it didn't just look high, it looked intimidating, like something designed for only the bravest people in the park. Among the crowd stood one 4-year-old Ty Sampson, visiting with friends. Ty was a big kid, tall, heavy, strong, built like an athlete. But even with all his confidence, he stared up at the huge tower with a nervous expression. "Man, I hope this thing can hold me," he said quietly. But his friends encouraged him, and Ty didn't want to back out. He wanted the thrill, the experience, the story to tell on the ride back home. When they reached the loading area, park workers were rushing. It was loud, busy, and chaotic. One by one, the operators slammed the harnesses down on each seat, barely taking a second to double-check anything. Ty sat down and immediately realized something was wrong. His harness didn't click like the others. It wasn't tight enough. It didn't lock the way it was supposed to. A worker pushed down hard, trying to force it. Another glanced over and muttered, "Yeah, it's a little loose, but he should be fine." No supervisor checked it. No second safety test. No one stopped the ride. Then the platform began lifting, slowly taking the riders higher and higher into the sky. People screamed in excitement, the wind picked up, and phones were already recording as the city of Orlando shrank below them. 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet, then the full 430 feet. At the top, everything went silent for a moment. Legs dangled in the air, the city lights sparkled below. Someone yelled, "This is insane!" Someone else held out their phone to film the drop. Then the magnets released. The chairs dropped at extreme speed, pulling the riders straight toward the ground. The sound of rushing air mixed with screams from every direction. But one thing on the video footage stood out. Ty was slipping. His loose harness was lifting, his hands were gripping the handles, trying to hold himself down with everything he had. Gravity was winning. In just seconds, the unimaginable happened. Ty slipped out, fell forward, and plummeted through the air. Hundreds of people on the ground froze. Some screamed, some covered their mouths, some dropped their phones, and others, without realizing what they were recording, captured the entire tragedy on video. The ride stopped, and a chilling silence fell over the park. Tourists rushed forward. Friends cried out for help. The ride operator stuttered, "I checked it. I swear I checked it." But the truth was clear. The harness wasn't safe. The warnings were ignored. The procedures weren't followed. Emergency crews arrived within minutes, but it was already too late. The footage spread across social media instantly, making the incident one of the most heartbreaking and widely viewed theme park accidents in America. During the investigation, officials discovered that Ty's seat had been manually adjusted to fit larger riders, making it dangerously unsafe. The ride had violated basic safety rules, and a family had lost a child because of it. The Orlando Freefall was shut down permanently. The structure was dismantled. The site now sits empty, quiet, still, heavy with memory. Today, when people walk past that area of Icon Park, many remember the truth. A theme park is supposed to be fun. A thrill ride is supposed to be safe. And no teenager should lose their life chasing a moment of excitement. Sometimes, the scariest stories aren't paranormal or supernatural. Sometimes, they happen in the places we trust the most. It was a bright summer afternoon in Osaka, Japan, clear sky, calm wind, and thousands of people crowding the famous Expoland amusement park. Families were eating shaved ice, kids were running around, and thrill seekers were lining up for the park's most popular roller coaster, Fujin Raijin II. The ride was famous not just because it was fast, but because it was designed as a standing roller coaster. Riders didn't sit. They stood upright, held in place by a chest restraint, with their legs straight beneath them. That design alone made people nervous and made others even more excited. At the front of the line was a 9-year-old college student laughing with her friends. They had planned this trip for weeks, one last day of fun before final exams. She wasn't a thrill ride person, but she didn't want to be the one backing out. When she looked up at the looping track twisting through the air, she tried to hide the anxiety building inside her. "Come on," her friend said. "It'll be fun. It's just 3 minutes. 3 minutes. That's all." She stepped into her position on the platform, the operator lowered the chest bar, and the train clicked into place. The restraints tightened, the locking pin dropped something the riders couldn't see, and the train slowly rolled out of the station. No one knew the truth. One of the wheel axles underneath the last car had a crack that had been missed in inspections, a crack that had been growing for years. The coaster picked up speed instantly. It climbed the first hill, crested, and dropped smooth, fast, controlled. Riders screamed with excitement, hair blowing back, hands gripping the bars. But halfway through the ride, everything changed. As the train entered a tight curve, there was a loud metallic snap so sharp and sudden that people in the park turned toward the sound. The cracked axle gave way completely. The back car shifted, slammed sideways, and began to rise off the track. The girl inside felt the entire floor shake beneath her feet. The restraint pulled unnaturally, like it was being torn away from the frame. Her eyes widened. Her last scream didn't sound excited, it sounded terrified. Then it happened. The train derailed. The back car swung violently, hitting the railing with a deafening crash. Metal twisted like paper. The force threw the girl sideways, slamming her into the structure before the train jerked again. People on the ground watched in horror as the coaster scraped against support beams, sending sparks flying through the air. Some riders began screaming for the operator to stop the ride. Others were frozen, unable to process what was happening. The train finally skidded to a stop on a slanted section of track. Smoke curled upward from the wheels. A thick smell of burnt rubber filled the air. The park went completely silent for a moment, stunned, confused, terrified. Visitors rushed toward the fence. Parents covered their children's eyes. Several people screamed for help. The girl in the back car wasn't moving. Within minutes, emergency crews arrived. Firefighters climbed onto the platform with harnesses and cutting tools, working desperately to free trapped riders. For others in the car, the injuries were brutal: broken bones, deep cuts, and trauma from being thrown against metal at high speed. But for the girl, the impact had been fatal. As her friends stood on the ground sobbing, investigators sealed off the ride. They examined every part of the track, every bolt, every wheel, and every maintenance record. Within days, the cause was discovered. A wheel axle had cracked due to years of wear. Inspections had failed to catch it. The ride had been running with a part that was slowly dying. News of the accident spread across Japan. Videos and photos taken by witnesses showed the coaster stopped mid-track. Riders crying, firefighters trying to reach the back car. People who once loved the ride now looked at it with fear. Expoland closed the ride permanently, and not long after, the park itself shut down for good. Today, the site where Fujinraijin II once stood is quiet. Just an empty space with no trace of the coaster that once echoed with screams of excitement. For many, it serves as a reminder. Sometimes the danger isn't the ride itself. Sometimes it's the things you can't see. The small cracks, the overlooked warnings, and the moment where fun turns into a nightmare. West Edmonton Mall in Canada was known as the largest mall in North America, an entire world under one roof. You could shop, swim, ice skate, and deep inside the mall, you could ride one of the most intense indoor roller coasters ever built. It was called the Mindbender, a steel beast painted bright yellow, twisting through the mall with loops, drops, and brutal G-forces that pulled riders to the edge of consciousness. People loved it because it was wild, fast, and completely enclosed. Every scream echoed through the walls like a thunderclap. It was the 14th of June, 1986. A busy Saturday night. Music blasted from nearby stores, families walked through the mall with shopping bags, and teenagers lined up at the amusement park area for the last thrill of the evening. Among them was a group of friends celebrating a birthday. They laughed, took photos, and jokingly argued over who would scream the loudest. None of them had any reason to worry. The Mindbender had run thousands of times without a single fatal accident. But behind the scenes, something was very wrong. A critical wheel assembly on the last car had been loosening for weeks. Several bolts had already fallen off. Maintenance logs showed unusual vibrations, but the warnings weren't taken seriously enough. At 10:10 p.m., the train rolled out of the station. The wheels hummed against the rails. Riders raised their hands, smiling, ready for the adrenaline rush. The first drop was perfect. The second loop was smooth. Everything felt normal. But as the coaster entered a long, twisting curve, something shifted. A jolt, a metallic crack, a vibration that didn't belong. People standing nearby turned their heads, frowning at the strange rattling sound echoing from the track. Inside the train, riders grabbed their restraints as the last car began shaking violently. The birthday group looked at each other in confusion. This didn't feel like part of the ride. Then came the moment no one ever forgets. The wheel assembly broke off completely. The entire back car swung outward, slamming into the concrete wall of the indoor park. Sparks erupted like fireworks. The metal screamed as it tore against the track. People in nearby stores stopped mid-step, staring in shock as the train roared past them, losing control. Riders in the back car were thrown sideways by the force. Their restraints twisted, the car partially detached, dragging behind the others like a wounded animal. The train then entered the third and final loop. Because of the missing wheels, the last car didn't have the speed to make it through. It didn't climb the loop. It slammed into the bottom of it. The impact was devastating. Seats crushed, metal bent. 3 passengers in the back car lost their lives instantly. Dozens more were injured, some critically. The entire mall froze. Music stopped. People screamed and ran toward the barricades. Security guards yelled for crowds to step back. Within minutes, emergency crews rushed into the building, firefighters carrying hydraulic tools, paramedics pulling stretchers, police clearing paths through the panicking crowd. The The bright lights of the mall reflected off the twisted, broken coaster, turning the scene into something out of a disaster movie. Rescuers climbed onto the track, working frantically to free the trapped survivors. Parts of the ride had to be cut open to reach them. The air was filled with sirens, crying, and the sharp chemical smell of overheated metal. The next day, investigators discovered the horrifying truth. 4 key bolts had fallen off the wheel assembly. The malfunction had been preventable. If the ride had been inspected more carefully, the accident might never have happened. The Mindbender was shut down immediately. Engineers spent months redesigning the ride with major safety improvements, new restraints, new wheels, stricter inspection rules. When it reopened years later, it was safer, but the tragedy never left people's minds. For the families of the victims, the mall that once symbolized fun and excitement became a place of heartbreak. And for the survivors, the sound of metal grinding in the dark would haunt them for years. Today, the Mindbender's story serves as a reminder. Even the strongest structures can fail. Even the safest places can become dangerous. And sometimes the most terrifying moments happen in places meant for joy. Alton Towers is known as one of the biggest and most exciting theme parks in the UK, packed with world-class rides, twisting tracks, and roller coasters designed to push thrill seekers to their limits. But none stood out more than the Smiler. With its 14 loops, flashing lights, spinning hypnotic patterns, and disorienting soundtrack, the Smiler wasn't just a roller coaster. It was an experience meant to overwhelm your senses. The 2nd of June 2015 started like any normal day at the park. Families lined up for snacks, teenagers filmed TikToks near the fountains, and the queue for the Smiler stretched far past its metal gates. People joked, took selfies, and watched the coaster zoom past with its signature scream. But hidden behind the excitement, something wasn't right. Earlier that day, one of the empty test cars had gotten stuck on the track after a computer fault. Standard procedure said the ride should remain closed until the issue was fully solved, but pressure was building. Visitors were complaining about the long wait times. Supervisors were trying to keep the ride operating. Employees were rushing, and one terrible decision was about to change everything. Around late afternoon, a fully loaded train packed with excited riders left the station. In the front row sat Vicky Bulge, a young woman enjoying a day out with her boyfriend. She smiled as she pulled her harness down, ready for the loops, the drops, and the thrill. No one told her, no one told any of them, that the earlier test car was still stalled on the track. The Smiler climbed its first lift hill, clicking loudly with each rise. The hypnotic lights flashed, music pulsed, crowds cheered below as the train completed its first few loops with perfect speed. Then, halfway through the ride, everything slowed down. The train didn't have enough momentum to clear the next section. It rolled into a near standstill on a high track. Riders waited, confused. What's happening? Is this part of the ride? Are we stuck? Operators in the control booth scrambled, checking screens and trackers. But because of the earlier fault, the system wasn't showing accurate data. Then one operator made a decision that would haunt the park forever. They manually overrode the safety system. They believed the track was clear. They believed the stalled car had already been removed. They believed the ride was safe. But they were wrong. The train jolted forward again, slowly building speed. Below, a few workers finally noticed something horrifying. The empty test car was still sitting on the track, directly in the path of the oncoming train. They yelled, waved their arms, tried to signal the control booth, but it was already too late. The loaded train came around a bend, picking up speed. Riders screamed, not out of thrill, but in pure terror as they saw the empty car ahead. There was no way to stop it. A split second later, crash. The two cars collided with brutal force. Metal folded like paper. Screams filled the entire path. Bodies were thrown forward. Bolts snapped, glass shattered, and riders felt their legs crush under the impact. Crowds on the ground gasped, hands covering their mouths. Some cried, others pulled out phones in shock. Vicky Balch was pinned, her legs trapped in twisted steel. Another young woman, Leah Washington, was also crushed. The riders waited, screaming for help as alarms blared across the park. Within minutes, paramedics, fire crews, and rescue teams arrived. They climbed up the tangled roller coaster with ropes and metal cutters, working frantically to free the survivors. But the injuries were catastrophic. Hours passed before everyone was removed. The scene looked like a disaster movie: twisted track, mangled cars, flashing lights, and a quiet, stunned crowd. In the end, 2 riders lost their legs. 5 others suffered life-changing injuries. Dozens were traumatized. Investigators concluded the truth. The crash wasn't caused by a mechanical failure. It wasn't caused by a malfunction. It wasn't caused by a freak accident. It was caused by human error. A decision to override a safety system that should never have been touched. The Smiler was closed for months. The park was fined heavily. Training and safety rules were completely rewritten. And for the riders whose lives changed forever, the sound of metal crashing into metal would never leave their memories. A ride meant to create happiness created one of the darkest days in theme park history. Six Flags Great Adventure in Jackson, New Jersey was always packed in the summer. Kids ran from ride to ride, parents carried snacks and souvenirs, and music echoed across the park. But one attraction stood out, not because it was the biggest, but because it preyed on fear: the Haunted Castle. It was a dark maze built from connected trailers, covered in castle decorations and filled with smoke machines, jump scares, and pitch-black hallways. Teenagers loved it because it felt dangerous, claustrophobic, confusing, and unpredictable. But behind all the props and spooky effects, there was something far more frightening. There were no sprinklers, no fire alarms, no emergency lighting, and most exits were nearly impossible to find in the dark. It was the 11th of May, 1984, a warm Friday evening. Dozens of teenagers lined up, excited for the cheap thrills inside the castle. Among them was a group of friends celebrating one boy's birthday. They joked, pushed each other forward, and bragged about who would scream first. None of them knew that inside the maze, something deadly was about to start. At around 6:30 p.m., a group of kids entered the attraction. One of them, playing around, flicked his lighter in the darkness to scare his friends. The flame touched a foam wall panel, a cheap, highly flammable material used in parts of the maze. At first, it was just a small spark, then a thin flame. Then, within seconds, the entire panel erupted. The fire spread fast, too fast. The walls were made of plastic, foam, wood, old props, and decorations that burned like gasoline. Flames crawled along the ceiling and down the narrow hallways. Inside the maze, the birthday group was laughing until they smelled smoke. Is that part of the effect? I can't see anything. Guys, something's wrong. Suddenly, the maze filled with thick black smoke. Real smoke, heavy, toxic, burning their eyes and throats. The sound of crackling flames echoed through the hallways, growing louder with each passing second. They tried to run, but every hallway looked the same. Every corner led to darkness. Every door felt locked. Panic set in. People screamed, stumbling into walls, choking on the toxic air. The emergency exits were hidden, unmarked or blocked by props. Staff outside had no fire alarms to warn them. Most didn't even know anything was happening. Then the power went out. Now it wasn't just smoky. It was total darkness. Flames consumed the maze behind them. Heat rolled through the hallways, turning the attraction into a furnace. The teenagers tried to find their way, hands on the walls, coughing, crying, desperately searching for any sign of escape. Some made it, most didn't. Outside, a parent screamed, "Something's burning! Someone call for help!" Workers ran toward the castle, but by the time they reached it, the fire was raging out of control, shooting out of the roof, melting plastic decorations, and pouring thick black smoke into the sky. Firefighters arrived within minutes, but it was too late to save those trapped deep inside. They battled the flames, cutting through twisted metal and melted walls, dragging out survivors and searching for missing teens. In the end, 8 teenagers, all boys between 13 and 19, lost their lives inside that maze. Some died from smoke inhalation, others from burns. None of them ever had a chance. In the investigation that followed, the truth came out. The haunted castle had almost no fire safety measures, no sprinklers, no alarms, no emergency signs, no proper exits, and the building materials were extremely flammable. The park argued that the attraction was temporary and didn't need strict fire regulations. But the families, the public, and investigators disagreed. This wasn't just an accident, it was preventable. The haunted castle was completely destroyed and never rebuilt. New fire laws were passed across the country, requiring strict safety measures in dark rides and haunted attractions. Today, the story of the haunted castle fire remains one of the darkest moments in theme park history. A place meant for fun and laughter became a deadly maze with no way out. And many who lived through that day say they can still remember the screams, the heat, and the moment they realized the real horror wasn't inside the attraction. The horror was the attraction. Skyshaft Tower was one of the tallest free-fall rides in the country, a 330-foot vertical drop designed to give riders a heart-stopping plunge. For years, it was the pride of the park. Tourists lined up every day, excited to feel the sudden rush, the stomach-twisting fall, and that unforgettable moment when the ride seemed to pause in mid-air before letting them drop at nearly 95 miles per hour. But on a summer night in July, something happened on Skyshaft Tower that would force the park to shut down the ride forever. That evening, the line was unusually long. The 4th of July fireworks were scheduled for later, and tourists wanted to squeeze in one last thrill before the show. Among them was one 9-year-old Ethan Price, a first-time visitor who had been urging his friends all day to ride the tower with him. Only one friend, Marcus, agreed. The others waited below with their phones ready to record the drop. As the group of riders were strapped into the seats, something subtle but crucial went unnoticed. Ethan's harness clicked into place, but it didn't produce the second lock sound that operators were trained to listen for. The primary latch held, but the backup safety lock never engaged. And in the noise of the crowds, shouting teens, rumbling machinery, and the heavy winds at the top of the tower, the missing click drowned unnoticed. The operator checked visually and tugged lightly on the restraints. Everything seemed secure. With a wave of his hand, he signaled the control booth. The ride began its slow ascent. Ethan was thrilled, completely unaware that his harness was only half secured. Marcus, sitting next to him, was recording the climb on his phone. The view grew wider, the wind colder, the voices below fading into a distant hum. At the top, the tower's lights flickered on as the sun began to set. Then came that eerie mechanical pause. The moment everyone holds their breath, the moment before the drop, the cables clanked, the brakes released, and the entire row of seats plunged downward. What happened next was captured by multiple cell phones videos that would later circulate online, raising questions about theme park safety across the nation. As the tower accelerated downward, the force pressed riders into their seats except Ethan. With only the primary latch engaged, the sudden negative G-force lifted his body upward and his harness began to loosen. Marcus screamed his name, but the fall was too fast. Halfway down the tower, Ethan was lifted completely out of his seat. For a split second, his body floated in the air weightless, suspended, silhouetted against the tower's LED lights before gravity reclaimed him. He fell sideways, crashing into the metal framework and plummeting the rest of the way down. The ride didn't stop immediately. It continued to the bottom as designed, brakes screeching while horrified riders screamed for help. By the time the tower reached the loading platform, the park had already gone into emergency lockdown. Security rushed to block off the area. The fireworks were cancelled. Visitors were evacuated in silence as paramedics arrived, but Ethan hadn't survived the fall. Investigations began within the hour. Safety inspectors combed through the tower's systems, and what they found shocked everyone. The secondary locking mechanism on Ethan's seat had been malfunctioning for 3 weeks. Several riders had complained earlier that day that their harnesses felt loose, but no official maintenance report had been filed. The park tried, unsuccessfully, to suppress the leaked videos of the accident. But by then it was too late. News networks aired them. Safety officials demanded federal inspections, and the ride was closed permanently. Today, Skyshaft Tower stands abandoned behind tall fences, untouched since that night. Former employees say that sometimes when the wind blows hard enough, the tower makes the same metallic clank the ride made before the drop, echoing through the empty park like a reminder of the moment everything went wrong. And though the ride is silent now, locals swear they occasionally hear something else when they walk past the fence late at night. A scream, short, sharp, and cut off by the wind, as if someone is falling all over again.